Hi, and welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And we're going to be talking a lot about energy and I'm sure some politics today with my guest, Art Berman. He is the founder and director of Labyrinth Consulting Services. Art, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thanks, Robert. Glad to be here.
So, Art, I didn't warn you, but all guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So I'm going to ask you, I've given your title, but if you don't mind, imagine you've just arrived somewhere and you don't know anyone and you have about 30 or 40 seconds to introduce yourself.
Right. So I'm a working petroleum geologist. I do a lot of commenting, writing about the oil and natural gas business, but it's not my main profession. Most of what I do is exploration and production, making maps, figuring out where to drill wells, figuring out what went right, what went wrong. And that's pretty much who I am. My clients are oil and gas exploration and production companies and a number of various funds, hedge funds, and portfolio managers, banks, and the like. So people are interested in where to drill wells, where not to drill wells, and what companies make sense as far as what they say versus what they really are.
That's good. So let me just start off because we've met a long time ago and I've followed your work for a long time. Let me ask you a simple question. What drives oil prices?
What drives oil prices? Simple answer, I guess, is supply more than anything else. People worry a lot about demand. I mean, you read just about any press version or listen to network. Oh, it's all about demand. Demand is down. Demand is up. Markets don't care about demand. Markets care about having enough supply. Obviously, demand is, you can't talk about supply without demand. But markets can affect supply with price. They cannot affect demand very, very effectively. And so, in my opinion, price formation, the technical aspect of price, is controlled by supply. Now, capital is equally important. We talk a lot about how this company's production has grown or not grown, and its position in the Permian is awesome or terrible or whatever. But without capital, and usually somebody else's capital, there's not a heck of a lot that these companies can do. And I don't care if it's Joe Blow Oil in West Texas or if it's a big oil company. So people seem to forget that without money and mostly other people's money, nothing much happens, well, anywhere, but certainly in the oil and gas business. So that's my simple answer. Obviously, that is oversimplified, but that's the answer.
So it's interesting when you say that, Art, because a long time ago I talked to a guy who had been on the Railroad Commission, the Texas Railroad Commission, for many years. And of course, as you know, from the mid-30s to about 1973, the Railroad Commission in Texas set the allowable, so they limited supply of oil into the world market. But his comment, and I remember it very clearly, he said every month we met to set the allowables, and we looked at the amount of oil in storage, and if it had gone up, then we reduced the allowable. If it went down, we increased it. And it was that simple. So does that rhyme? I mean, it seems like that follows somewhat on what you're talking about that supply is really the issue.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, to be very clear, it's about supply balance. It's about supply minus demand. But I'm glad you brought up that comment because inventory is part of supply. Let's face it. I mean, you produce a certain number of barrels of oil and you sell some of it, and where do you put the rest? You put it in storage. And so the most important calibration tool that I use is something called Comparative Inventory, where it's a very simple concept. You look at what inventories are right now, and I mean, the major refined products and crude oil, and you subtract the 5-year average from that, and that gives you a normalized number as to how this week, this month, or whatever data you're looking at compares to the last 5 years. And if we're above it, then we've probably got a little bit of an oversupply going on. And so your buddy at the Railroad Commission would say, well, we need to reduce the allowables so that we get things in balance. If there's a deficit, if in other words, we're the comparative inventory is less than the 5-year average. Well, I guess we need to increase production, and that way you keep price stable by balancing the two. And of course, OPEC. You listen to what those guys, what their subtext is, and certainly the Saudi oil minister, he's all about inventory. I mean, that is his measure, and people keep saying, well, yeah, but it's about price. Well, the two are intimately related. I mean, if you look at a graph that shows, say, WTI comparative inventory versus WTI price, I mean, you'll never see a more perfect negative correlation. And we can argue all day about why that should be so, but I'm sort of a practical guy, and if something seems to work that well, it must mean something, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, and you mentioned OPEC, because one of the things that, we've met before, but we haven't had much in terms of conversations like this. But one of the things that occurs to me is the issue with OPEC, and the issue as I look at the history of the oil and gas business, and I'm nowhere near your expertise, but that the recurring problem, and OPEC is an example of it, before at the Railroad Commission, was that the industry has always tried to limit supply to support price. Is that fair? Or put another way, is the recurring problem in the oil industry too much supply, and therefore there's always a limit to too much supply, and there's a limit, an ongoing effort to limit it?
Well, I think you've said it correctly, Robert. And if we look back in history, I mean, way back to the times when the Texas Railroad Commission, along with our fellow organizations in Louisiana and Oklahoma, for the most part, effectively controlled world oil price. Well, I mean, let's back up and say, why was that? And so after World War II, the United States produced about 50% of the oil in the world. I mean, we were way more than the Saudi Arabia of the world. And so we did it because we could, and because it made sense. And shockingly, the driving factor behind those decisions was to make sure we, the United States, had enough oil in case we really, really needed it. And around 1971, 72, 73, when our production, U.S. production, started to decline, the Railroad Commission said, okay, we can't do this anymore. And there were a lot of other factors there, like
sure,
the devaluation of the world currency with the exit from Bretton Woods and a bunch of other things. But that's when OPEC, which had formed at least a decade before then, that's when they stepped in and saw their opportunity. But I guess the point is that first the Texas Railroad Commission and then OPEC, at least ostensibly, were trying to control price through supply. The problem is that people in the oil and gas business, the companies themselves, they're always a cycle off. They always overshoot or undershoot. And so prices go up and they say, oh boy, let's start drilling. And they drill like crazy with other people's money, and they don't get the memo that, okay, we're starting to get too much oil. And so they overproduce, and then the price collapses. Oh my God, now what? And they stop drilling. And eventually, or maybe not so eventually, the market catches up with them, and they catch them with their pants down, and we're not drilling enough wells, so the market raises price. So it's
and that's where we are now. I mean, isn't it? I mean, after COVID, after this kind of implosion of the whole shale gas and shale oil and shale gas sectors, we're now in a period where there's an entire recalibration globally. We had the complications of COVID, but oil prices. You didn't mention the value of the U.S. dollar as one of these issues as well, right? That affects the price of oil, but it's the combination of all of these things. And I guess one of the things that, you were kind enough to send me one of your recent presentations, and it rhymes with a lot of what I've thought about is, I'll ask the question this way, especially after COVID. Are these increasing prices just an proof that there's no replacement for oil?
Well, okay, there's a loaded question.
Okay.
First of all,
we only have an hour here, Berman. So
I understand. Let's just say this: regardless of COVID or any other external factor, there is no replacement for oil. In good times, in bad times, regardless of OPEC, Texas, it doesn't matter. There is no replacement for oil. At least not that I'm aware of that's within any kind of current technology. And what I mean by that, don't get me wrong, I'm not an oil partisan. It is true I've spent my life as a petroleum geologist, but I'm sort of an equal opportunity employer. I look at at all forms of energy. I consider myself an energy expert, and the reason that the world uses so much oil right now is because there's a multiplier effect. How much energy is contained in a unit volume of whatever it is that I decide I want to use, whether it's oil, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, whether it's solar. I mean, you name your drug of preference. And the simple fact of the matter is that oil has the highest energy density of anything we've ever found that's abundant and is reasonably transportable and useful in a lot of different kinds of uses. So, we can talk about, well, but solar's cheap and wind is cheap and okay, the installation costs, fine. We can argue about how that actually works out, but they have problems. Your electric car runs out of charge, and you go to a charging station, and you can't just fill up the tank and take off and drive away. You got to cool your jets for 4 or 5 hours or whatever while the thing charges up. Well, that's fine. That's what you get, but it's just not nearly as convenient as I got a few drops of gas in my tank. I make it to the Exxon station. I dump a bunch of gas in, I pay for it, and boom, I'm off for 400 more miles. So,
after refueling for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then depending on if you have to pee or get a Gatorade or something, you could be 10 minutes, but it's not an hour.
And people gripe about the cost of gasoline and all of that, but the reality is, if you travel at all, and I know you do, and you find yourself in some foreign country, and you got 10 guys, and you need to go someplace halfway across town, you're going to spend $50 in a cab or rickshaw or whatever.
Right.
Whereas $50, is going to fill the tank of some giant U.S. guzzler and keep you on the road for 400 or 500 miles. I mean, it's just not that bad of a deal. I mean, again, I'm not arguing as a partisan. I'm just saying, as a practical guy that has to shell out money to pay people. So there's a multiplier effect that you just
and when you say multiplier effect, I think that's interesting because what I hear you saying when you're saying that is that you're talking about energy density, and you've talked about this, and it's something a theme that I've written about: energy density, power density, energy density, cost, and scale. And it seems like that's the key, right? That the power density, the footprint of oil and gas is relatively small compared to wind and solar, and especially biofuels. And then the energy density of it is just, as you say, my line is, if oil didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. It's like this miracle substance.
Just like God, right?
I'm not sure I quite follow. We'd have to invent God if God didn't exist. And
that's a quote from someone, that if God didn't exist, we would invent him.
Oh, okay.
But that's not my belief, but whatever. No, so let's just get this real straight. I mean, the one of the slides that I sent you actually shows the calculation. And so if you take a barrel of oil, 42 gallons of crude oil, and you actually calculate, how much energy, whether it's in, kilowatt hours or joules or, whatever you want, calories, calculate it out, and then say, well, what is the energy output of a human being? And given the fact that we don't work 365 days a year and we're not 100% efficient and blah, 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 it works out that a barrel of oil contains about 4.5 years of human manual labor, with all the discounts thrown in. I mean, that is a multiplier effect that you just can't begin to match. And so if the world uses 100 billion barrels of oil, 100 million barrels of oil a day, and you multiply that out, that's the equivalent of having 500 billion people working. We don't have 500 billion people on the planet. We've got 7 billion. That's the multiplier. It's a productivity. It's an effectiveness multiplier that you cannot beat. And so you compare that with other, and there's all these fancy, energy return on investment, and I'm all for that. Net energy. How much energy do you have to put in to get it out? It's complicated. It's a little bit messy. It's a brilliant concept, but the bottom line is that you use anything else, and you instead of getting 4.5 years, let's be real generous and say, with solar and wind, maybe you get 4 or 5 months. So, that's the kind of thing we're talking about, which, and I'm not in any way suggesting or arguing that we not use other forms of energy, because diversification is critical. And, let's use the solar, let's use the wind, let's use the hydro and everything, nuclear. But let's just be clear. There is nothing as good, just from a pure physics standpoint, as oil that we've found so far. Period. That's it.
And if someone were to say, "Oh, well, there's Berman just talking his book," then you're going to say, "Well, no." It's interesting. You quoted Václav Smil. We're both fans of his work. He had these. He had a great interview in the Guardian in 2019. He said, "I do not tolerate nonsense. I grew up surrounded." He's Czech, and I grew up surrounded by commie propaganda. The bright tomorrow, the great future of mankind. So I'm as critical as they come. It's not my opinion. These are the facts. I don't write opinion pieces. I write things that are totally underlined by facts. And then he says, and you quoted him here on this part, you said, "The Economist will tell you we can decouple growth from material consumption, but that is total nonsense." Which is
total nonsense.
Well,
and again, I'm with him. He's just so brilliant. I'm small compared to him and his knowledge, but I'm a scientist. I'm a geologist, and I have my opinions, and I have my preferences, and I have my biases, just like every human being. But the bottom line for me is data. It's facts. It's information. And whatever my opinion is, say of solar, wind versus oil, these are the facts. And these are the comparisons. Just like, I want to buy a house.
Right.
Maybe I like this house a whole lot, but the value, what you want for it just doesn't compare to what I can get somewhere else. I'm not going to buy your house. So, just in a purely objective way, there is no comparison to oil that we know of right now. And again, that includes things like cost and all of that.
Well, so what Smil's quote about we cannot this that will tell you we can decouple growth from material consumption. So this recovery in oil prices is reflecting then the recovery of the global economy. Is it that simple?
Not quite, but yeah, basically on some level, yeah. So we, the economic activity went way down, price of oil went way down. And now the level of economic activity, it's not back to where it was before, but it's made a very impressive recovery, and so has our consumption of oil. There's a slide that I sent you that probably many of the people listening to this podcast have seen some version of, and it's just GDP, country GDP versus oil consumption. And again, that's you can make the same graph using wind or solar or whatever you want, but it's like it's an almost perfect statistical correlation. It's got an R squared of something like 0.95, and so the simple you can argue all day why it's so, but the countries that use the most oil have the highest GDP.
It's like as with electricity, right? The same thing, right?
GDP is messy. It's not the best measure in the world. Everyone knows that, but it's kind of what we got, and as a high level, it's not too bad. And so it makes sense. The countries that use the most oil, which is the most efficient way of getting a lot of work, I'm talking physics work,
right,
out of something, are going to use the most efficient source. And so unless you're just, burning it and wasting it, if you're using it to produce work, then the country that uses the most oil will create the most work. And theoretically, at least, their economy should be pretty darn good because they're making a lot of goods and services and selling them to other people.
Right.
It's not that complicated.
So I'm just going to interrupt. My guest is Art Berman. He's the director, founder of Labyrinth Consulting Services. You can find him at artberman.com. In a recent presentation, I want to shift gears a little. I do have one other question here. So where's global oil demand growing the fastest now on either a per capita basis, on an overall country basis? Is that China? Where's the big demand pull?
Well, another difficult question to answer, but overall, I think I would have to say it's the developing world, and China to some extent is, they're on the cusp of a developing country and a developed country. China's demand, and India's also, it's population based. I mean, you got two countries there that constitute something like 20% of the world's population. So it's sheer numbers, but they are, in my world, they're developing countries, and I don't mean that in any derogatory sense. But they've got a lot of very poor people that are wanting or coming into wanting to get into the middle class. They want cars, they want houses, they want stuff. So that's where it's coming from. And countries like ours and the OECD, the developed world, if you will, we're using less per capita all the time because of a lot of reasons. Our populations are not growing as fast. We're more interested in efficiency. We're a little bit more concerned about the environment, perhaps. I mean, many factors, but those are the facts. The facts are that electricity use in the United States, it's going down, right?
It's been flat for 15 years, right? It hasn't grown at all.
Which, doesn't mean that you and I aren't using more than our fair share of electric power right now, because we are, but we're using it more efficiently.
Right. I don't waste any, by the way. I never waste any energy. I always use just the right exact amount. I'm sure.
I'm cheap as hell, man. And by the way, markets are too. They hate to overpay. And so, we have so many analysts who talk about ridiculous things or, nonsense in Schmiel's words. Oil's going to $100 a barrel. Well, I mean, I don't know exactly who the market is, but the market's you and the market's me. And we just agreed that the two of us are cheap guys. So who exactly is it that's going to pay $100 a barrel for oil? Well, if supply is desperate enough, the market will pay $100 a barrel for oil, but it isn't going to do it because, that would be fun. We used to pay $100 a barrel. Let's pay $100 a barrel now. No, the market's going to look at what supply is available. What's it going to take to get these jerks drilling again? That's what the market's thinking. And
I think they prefer the term lunkheads. I'm not sure, but lunkheads.
Call them what you will. I've been a member of a lot of jerk companies, but bottom line, Robert, is if oil companies tell you or me or the Dallas Fed, which they regularly do, and they say, we're making money at $52 a barrel, and their quarterly statements reflect that they've got good free cash flow right now, which most of them do, then why in the world would I, a cheap guy, pay them $100 when they're telling me they're fine at $50? I mean, I'm not a fool. Hey, if you guys can make money at 50, I'm going to try to give you 50. and okay, there's a problem because not everybody, for a lot of reasons, they got caught by surprise. There's not enough wells drilling. Fine, I'll give you 60.
Right.
Maybe I'll give you 65, but I'm not going to give you 100 unless I have to.
And it's clear, when you're saying that too, I'm, what I'm thinking in my own head, well, the guys at OPEC are reading the paper too, and they know what that break-even price is too. So it's not like they're going to set their price in a vacuum. But let me switch. There was one thing you wrote recently. You said energy is the economy. Money is a call on energy. Debt is a lien on future energy. And then you also said no species has ever gone from a higher to a lower density energy source. I like that idea that money is a call on energy. I'd never seen that formulation. Can you expand on that? And then debt is a lien on energy. I mean, you're essentially, and in another place you said oil is the economy. So can you unpack that a little bit? I just like the way you wrote that idea.
Yeah, sure. And let me, be clear. I mean, I didn't invent that idea. That idea first came to me in that format from my friend Nate Higgins, who is also, he's more of a biophysical economist, I guess you'd say. But he and I have worked together for a long, long time. We were both working at the oil drum back in the days when the oil drum was something. And the idea there is very simple, that money is nothing more than a call on work. Okay. And so back in, go back to the Paleolithic time or whatever, and you and I need to eat. And so we decide, hey, let's go hunting. And you and I choose to use our own work to go try to kill something or catch something or whatever that will give us calories or joules or whatever so that we can live. So our work that we do gets us a surplus of work so we can sit around and chew the fat for a couple of days before we have to go hunting again.
Right.
And so, with the advent of agriculture about 10,000 years ago, for the first time in human history, and agriculture is a messy deal. It's, I'm not sure it was a good thing for everybody, but it was great for population growth. Agriculture, for the first time, allowed some people to have a surplus. I mean, there's only so long you can keep a bear.
Right.
He's going to rot. But with grain, we can store the stuff, and now I got a surplus. And so I got a whole barn full of grain. And being lazy and cheap, which I am, maybe I don't feel like doing some manual job like digging a ditch. And so I say, hey, Robert, you got a kid? I'll tell you what, if he'll dig me that ditch, I'll give him I'll give him a bushel of wheat for digging that ditch.
Right.
And you say, well, let me talk to my kid. Kid says, yeah, sure. He digs my ditch, digs my hole. I give him a bushel of wheat, and we're good. All right. So the bushel of wheat is the call on your kid's work. Well, I mean, wheat is not exactly the easiest thing to use to get people to do what I want. So eventually I invent currency. And currency, what was currency until the 1970s? It was a pile of gold or silver. It was something that had that, just like wheat.
Right.
So money, people think the economy runs on money. It doesn't. It runs on work. Everything runs on work. And
if I can interrupt, and energy is the ability to do work, and power is the rate at which work gets done. So with the quick physics lesson here,
just basic physics. And so when I say oil is the economy, all I mean by that is that oil is the primary source of work in the global economy. It's not the only one, and coal is important, and natural gas, and so is hydroelectric and everything else. So energy is the economy.
Well, I think it's interesting you said that, because what vibes in my head are, was I thinking when you're thinking about that, I said, I remember I met a guy who was in the railroad business a long time ago. He said, without transportation, there's no commerce. Well, without oil, there's no transportation. So then without oil, there's no commerce. So, I mean, I'm throwing in a different idea here, but that ability to get goods to market, and the fact that oil dominates, as you pointed out many times in the transportation sector. Without it, there's no transportation. Well, there's no commerce. Then there's no business moving. The things aren't moving. So is that you've written, we talked a little bit about EVs, and I want to come back to that, but isn't that really where we're going in terms of what makes the global economy move is oil, and therefore without it, we're screwed. Is that too scientific?
Not at all. And let's be even more graphic.
Sure.
Let's talk about, what does it take to support a world population of almost 8 billion people? Now, the world didn't have anywhere near 8 billion people until almost our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
the end of World War One, the world economy was something like 2 billion, maybe a little bit less, maybe it's hard to know precisely, but it's in that range. And why was that? Was it that people didn't like to reproduce before 1920? No, the world could not produce enough food to feed more than about 2 billion people. And there were two German guys named Haber and Bosch back just before World War One started that figured out how to supply the world with enough free nitrogen to make fertilizer. Now, we knew about fertilizer forever, and until Haber and Bosch came along, we used whatever we could find, bat guano or whatever. But there, for some reason, the earth is just not rich in free nitrogen. And so, but the air is. And so Haber and Bosch figured out how to liquefy air. Same process we use to liquefy natural gas. It costs a fair amount of money. You got to cool it and pressurize it. But all of a sudden, we had a source of free nitrogen, and we could make as much fertilizer as we wanted. And that, more than anything else, in my reading of history, and Václav Smil, by the way, it was fertilizer more than any single other factor that allowed the world population to grow to the size that it is right now. Well, what's fertilizer made from? How do you do it? Well, it's made of methane. It's made of natural gas. And it takes a ton of power to run the process that supercools and superpressurizes air. And so without fossil energy, coal, natural gas, and oil, we just don't have the means to make enough fertilizer. We're back to World War One.
Right.
And we can't support a population of anywhere close to 7 or 8 billion people. And so one of the things that that the so-called green or degrowth or whatever you want to call them people are, and by the way, I'm a conservationist. I love nature, no problem there. But when they talk about let's get off of fossil energy altogether soon, like tomorrow, what they're not understanding or telling you is that means the death of at least half the planet. Is that part of your platform, guys? I mean, you want to go advertise that we're, that part of what we want to do is mass extermination or mass starvation. And think about what that does to the dynamic of civil order. If half the world doesn't have enough to eat or the means to make a living, what are they going to do? They're going to sit there and starve to death? No, they're going to migrate. They're going to come to your country or my country.
Or they're going to riot or overthrow who's ever in charge and make sure that they get heard somehow, some way.
Or countries are going to fight wars over the existing resources. It creates a huge mess in the world. One way or another, the world will find the most efficient way to reduce its population to about 3 billion. One way or another. And every way it will do it is ugly. And is that really what you want? Now, that question doesn't have a nice answer. It really doesn't. And that is the problem with these radical ideas. We talk about everybody's an expert on something, but how many people actually know how to think in terms of a system? I mean, energy is a system. The earth is a system. The economy is a system. And if I pull out a piece over here, what happens to everything else? So, my grandchildren like to play this, Jenga game where you start taking pieces out of some structure, and you got to figure, well, when does the thing fall down? Because if it falls down on me, I lose the game.
Right.
So you take out these little pieces, and you think, well, it's fine. All we do is replace it with something else. But if we replace it with something else that doesn't have anywhere near the productivity or the efficiency of oil, then the structure falls down. It falls down.
So let me ask you about that, because I've thought the same. I mean, what is the end game for the people who are promoting these kinds of all renewable mirage, the all renewable fantasy? And I've been writing about it for a long time. One guy I met recently, he was one of these big pressure groups. I'm not going to call them green groups anymore, environmental groups, because I don't think they are. He said, we're a campaigning organization. and which means, he was just saying it flat out. Well, we don't have to manage anything. We're just going to push a point of view. But is that all it is? I mean, I guess the short question would be, what's their end game? The people who are pushing these scenarios, what do you see as their end game? And maybe I'm asking you to be a mind reader, and that's not your business. But I mean, what's their goal?
Well, I'm not only not a mind reader, but I'm not an abnormal psychologist either. But I honestly, I say that in jest, but it really does have to do with psychology, and more than that, it has to do with belief. And so we have a lot of people, say, in this country right now, who prefer to believe in conspiracy theories than to believe in information. Why? Because it simplifies their lives. The fact
it's a religious. On the podcast I've had Sally Trimbath some weeks ago, and she was a theologian, and she talked about this idea of around climate and redemption and salvation, and these issues around energy and climate were very intimate, very closely aligned with Christian belief, right? So she said, well, this is religious orthodoxy, just like anything else. So is that your point? That
is exactly my point. And so if we have in fact soiled our bed. The earth, as children, we got punished for that. Okay. No, I told you not to do that. I mean, this is, classic Freudian superego kind of stuff. So what do? I want to show you that I'm a grown up. I didn't do that. He did that. It's all those nasty oil companies. And what we have to do is we have to punish them. We have to, we have to put them in jail. We have to deconstruct them. We have to make them go away so that I can show Daddy that I'm a grown-up boy.
Or in this case, Mommy, which would be Mother Earth, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, both ways. And again, that's a little bit oversimplified, but that's what belief is based on. And I'm not opposed to belief, but let's understand what is belief and what is fact.
Well, let me follow up on that, because that seems to be now there. You mentioned Exxon, and it just these pressure campaigns, and you've seen it by the state of New York taking New York to trial, and then right at the end of the trial pulling some of their initial legal claims and saying, oh no, we're withdrawing those right after, I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars the company, I'm not just saying this is Exxon. But yeah, never mind. And now the pressure groups, including, I guess, Engine Number One or whatever the name of the company is, very small hedge fund, they're aiming at Chevron. Well, is it that those big companies then are easier to pressure? Because this is one theory that I've heard, that this ESG movement, the net zero movement, all of these are really campaigns that are aimed at these publicly traded companies because they're more susceptible to public pressure than privately held companies or other entities. Is that a fair assessment? How do you see that?
Well, it is fair to some extent. Every public company has to be sensitive to its shareholders, or else it's out of business on some level. And Exxon, I suppose, is a good example of a company that really just never has kind of given a crap about what anybody thinks about what it does. And I say that as somebody that respects Exxon tremendously. I worked for them as a contractor for several years and have tremendous respect for their organization. However,
and a few years ago, Lee Raymond was very clear about that. I mean, as a CEO and a chairman, he did not do them any favors. But he was a very gruff and well, yeah, up yours was kind of his attitude about every critic.
He was the CEO at the time I'm talking about in the early 2000s. But that's the way the company was, and their attitude was, look, we've had the premier return on investment or whatever you want to measure for an awful long time. We know what we're doing, so let us do it. And that's not working for them so well anymore for a variety of reasons, and so they're more vulnerable. And so this little pressure group, if you will. I mean, what's in it for them? I mean, some of it's belief, but some of it's money, right? I mean,
yeah, right.
They're paying salaries. I mean, I don't know what the CEO of Engine Number whatever it is makes, but he's not doing this for free.
Sure.
So we all need to earn a living, and that's fine. I'm not criticizing them, but yeah, I mean, we all need a job, and whether that job is doing the kind of work you and I do, or whether that job is, being a Taliban. I mean, that's a job too, right? Let's face it.
Not a job I'd want. Um,
Somebody wants it because they don't have anything else to do, right?
Apparently not, unfortunately. So last year you wrote an article titled "The Party Is Over for Shale and U.S. Energy Dominance." And U.S. energy dominance. And then your subtitle was "The U.S. is screwed when it comes to near to medium term oil production." So why is the party over? And you clearly don't like do you like this term energy dominance? I've never liked it, but anyway, is the
Oh, I
party
hate
over?
it. I
Yeah, go
hate it.
ahead.
Well, it's a fabrication.
Uh huh.
I mean, the United States has not been energy self-sufficient in my adult lifetime, and the fact that if you can't even be energy self-sufficient, the United States imports, 6 million barrels of oil a day, and we still import a net of, let's just call it 3 million or so. It's a lot better than it was, say, before shale. But I mean, 3 million barrels a day. I mean, that's that for most countries. I mean, that's off the charts for import volume. So we are not energy self-sufficient. Never have been. Well, I shouldn't say that. We probably were or could have been back before World War II, but we weren't because we chose to trade and do other
Right.
smart things.
Right.
And as far as energy dominance, I mean, who is energy dominant? I mean, is Saudi Arabia energy dominant? Maybe, but not enough to do all the things that they want to. Nobody's energy dominant. The oil commodity market is the biggest commodity market in the world. And I don't care how big you are, whether we're talking about barrels per day of production or reserves or just capital, how much money you have to throw around. Nobody's big enough to control the oil market for very long. Maybe a few days or a few hours or maybe even a few months if if all your buddies get together like OPEC plus. But I would contend, and I don't know if I did in that particular article, but I think one of the problems with OPEC and OPEC plus is that, which means Russia and a couple of other guys that tag
Right.
along, Mexico, Kazakhstan, whatever, is you cannot manage a market for very long. Maybe De Beers could manage diamonds for a while.
Right.
They can't anymore. But diamonds, that was a little bitty market, mostly came from one country or a few countries. Oil is huge. You can't manage a market like oil.
And that market is what, $2 trillion a year, something like that. If you figure it out, just based on what $50 or $60 oil, 100 million a day, something like that. I mean, it's an extraordinarily big number.
Well, and then you count. You say, well, you only have to put down 10 cents on a dollar to put a contract on oil. So multiply that by or divide that by 0.1, and it's even bigger. So you can't do that. You can try and you can claim that you can. So my point is that let's assume for a moment. One of the other things I hated was, the United States is the new swing producer of oil.
Right.
Well, no, not even a little bit. A swing producer, whatever that means, what it means is that I've got enough extra production in my pocket that I can just turn it on or turn it off when I want to and swing supply. That means that I have to have a few million barrels a day at least that I can turn off and turn on. The United States, at the height of the shale boom, we never had anything to turn on and turn off. I mean, we were selling every barrel. We're a price taker. Okay, that's what the U.S. oil business is, and that's not a criticism. That's what we are. But a taker needs a buyer, and you can't be in business unless somebody's going to take your oil. And so when I listen to people talk, isn't it great that the U.S. is energy self-sufficient and we're energy dominant? Well, if this oil we're producing is so damn good, why do we sell every barrel of it to export? and continue to import somebody else's oil. What's that about? And that's because not all oil is the same.
Right.
And again, this is just a fact. The oil we produce in the United States is not that good. It's not that good for what refineries need today. It was great in 1940, but it's got a chemistry that isn't that good. And so we see how much of that stuff we can pawn off on other people so that we can afford to buy the good stuff that runs our refineries.
And so if I can interject, and I, correct me if I'm wrong, but the U.S. is producing light sweet. It's a mismatch with U.S. refining in general, which
everybody's refining.
Yeah. So, but that our refineries were built for higher sulfur, lower quality crudes that make the refiners can make more money off of that type of.
Well, you say lower quality, but it's got a higher energy density, doesn't it?
Oh, okay. All right. A different. Okay. Yeah. Different formulation.
But let's just think about it. One more little anecdote.
Sure, of course.
I can't remember the guy that came up with this. It wasn't me, but he said, "Well, he was talking about U.S. energy independence. He said, if I'm a country that manufactures no automobiles, and I import millions of automobiles from Italy and France and whatever every day, and I paint them green, and then I export them to the world, am I a net exporter of automobiles?" And his answer was, actually, I'm an exporter of green paint.
That's funny.
And that's kind of what the United States does. We are the superpower of refining and reselling refined products to the world, and good for us. But an awful lot of that oil that goes into those refineries to produce the gasoline and the diesel and the jet fuel comes from other people's oil because it's better than ours.
So let me follow up on the shale thing, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I don't know, it was 8 or 10 years ago we were on a panel together somewhere in Florida. I forgot exactly where. And you were predicting then that in Jacksonville, thank you. And you were predicting it was going to end badly. And I remember I was much more sanguine about it. I thought everything was fine. Deloitte, I think it was last year, estimated there was $300 billion in capital that was destroyed by the shale drillers in the United States. Is that number in the neighborhood, or do you have a different number? And is that the right term for it? The $300 billion was just invested and then just lost, and the winner was the consumer because of lower prices? Is that it? If you can summarize what's happened with the shale revolution in just those stark terms, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I probably, capital destruction is probably not the term that I would use, but if Deloitte used that's fine. And so back to the discussion or the meeting we had back there in Jacksonville, I was at the time, I guess I'd say, more naive than perhaps you were, and I honestly believe that if a company or an industry couldn't make money, that eventually they would be forced to stop producing the product that they did, and I was dead wrong. And that's why what I expected would end poorly in terms of supply was incorrect, because I had no idea that investors would continue to give money to companies that were losing their asses on every MCF they sold. But in the end, we were both right. I was right in that this business model is absurd. It just doesn't make any sense. And anybody who was a sanguine investor wouldn't put a dime into this thing. It's nuts, but they did. Okay, and everybody caught up to that. And so back to your question about the article where I said we're screwed. Sometime around mid 2018, the investment community got wise to the shale gig. They said, you know what, you guys, you keep talking about making money, and you never make any money. You've never made any money. In fact, you lost a ton of money. every quarter, just about of every year for a decade. And you know what? We're done. We're not, and it didn't happen in one day, but it was a gradual process, of course. And so where we are right now, whether we're talking about shale gas or tight oil, is the companies are saying, okay, we got religion. And
this time is different. We're gonna be disciplined this time. You just watch us.
And you know what gives me discipline? I got no money. It's real easy to put some lipstick on that pig. I don't have the money to drill the wells I want to, so I'm going to call it fiscal discipline. I'm going to call it return in value to the shareholder. But give those guys more money, and I think that fiscal discipline goes right out the window. I mean, and I don't mean to pick on the shale guys. This is the oil industry. This is the way we, and I include myself, have always been. That's the way we are, for better or worse.
It's always going to be boom and bust.
We have never returned the kind of free cash flow that we talk about. And you look historically at, when did oil companies in general ever have any free cash flow over the last 20 years? And, maybe 1 year, maybe two. I mean, it's not a shale disease. They just happen to be, they abuse the privilege. I mean, they're an end member of the way the oil is.
Just the latest example of how the industry has been for decades.
It's a risk-taking industry.
So if I'm reading you right, and just the way you're talking about it in your body language, you wouldn't buy oil and gas stocks today, or are you a buyer? Or would you be a buyer?
I am not. No, I am not.
So this business, you've done it for 40 years, but you don't think that that's a reasonable, a wise investment for a retail investor?
I think there are companies that are wise investments.
Such as
Chevron.
And why?
I look at their balance sheet, and I look at their assets, and I compare them. I mean, if you wanted an energy stock, I'm not saying that you do, but if you wanted one, I do a simple exercise where I look at share price of a whole bunch of companies, and I normalize them over some period, and I do the same with oil price. And I look at those curves and I say, what company is outperforming WTI or performing at the level of WTI or underperforming? And you look at that crowd, and the answer is that today, at least, Chevron and Pioneer are outperforming their peers. And Conoco doesn't do too bad. ConocoPhillips doesn't do too badly either. Most of the rest of them, and companies like Oxy and Exxon, I mean, they're grossly underperforming the base commodity, which is oil, and their peers. So, I don't have a preference among those companies. I mean, I don't like one better than the other, but the first pass is just to look at that. As a shareholder, if their share price is going down, I'm not going to make any money, right?
Sure. Well, so let me ask you about that. And again, my guest is Art Berman. He's the director of Labyrinth Consulting Services, and you can find him at artberman.com. You publish a lot of graphs, and I ask this kind of as a lark, but serious. I mean, you handle a ton of data. So on any given day or on any given week, how many spreadsheets are you managing? How many graphics are you working on? Because you're very prolific in putting out different reports, and you're multiple different. I mean, how many spreadsheets are you updating on as part of your business, or is that even do you even know that number?
I don't know that number, Robert, but it's many. It's dozens. And before we went on air, you asked me, well, what is Labyrinth Consulting, sir? It's me. I mean, right. I'm the only employee. I don't have guys that that do this stuff for me. So
it's DIY.
It is, and it's it's being as efficient as I know how to work. I mean, that's what I do. I link spreadsheets, and I'm good at them. I mean,
you are good at them. I ask as someone who's fairly envious, because my spreadsheets are always just very simple graphics. That's the only kind I can do. Let me shift gears a little bit on you, Art, here, because I know that you got an undergraduate degree in Middle Eastern history, and that was interesting to me, and a graduate degree in petroleum engineering. we went to Lebanon 4 years ago for the film that I produced, Juice: How Electricity Explains the World, and wrote about it in my book. And I've been watching Beirut and, of course, the economic disaster there. Is there what are the big rivalries that are defining the Middle East? I'm assuming you're still following that area of the world. And is there an ascendant player in the Middle East? And if so, who is it?
Well, I guess the simple answer is, the Middle East is always been a zone of conflict of everything. I mean,
Right.
It's sort of the center of. I mean, it's not really the middle of anything geographically, but it was the middle of the trade path from the Orient to the Occident, and I think that's where the term came up. But Iran is the ascendant power, if you will, and has been for really a long time. I mean, beginning in the right after World War II. Countries like the traditional power sources like Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi Arabia has always been propped up by the United States, and so I like to point out to people who are interested, and only a few are, but that at the end of World War II, I've already mentioned the United States produced something like half the oil in the world. We were completely energy self-sufficient. And President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, formed a commission because he wanted to understand how the hell we'd won World War II. Because he didn't think we would at certain points in the effort. And the answer that he got from the commission was better access to petroleum than our enemies. And of course, Japan has no petroleum. In fact, the way they got into Pearl Harbor was they took Indonesia, because Indonesia had oil and rubber, by the way, that you need for jeeps,
right?
Military equipment. Germany, where did they attack first? They attacked countries that kind of made no sense. Why? Because they had oil refineries.
Romania.
Romania. They worked on all this, gas to liquids kind of stuff because they knew that they were at a disadvantage. So Roosevelt,
Fischer-Tropsch, or the Fischer-Tropsch process.
Exactly. Yeah, another Haber-Bosch kind of a synthesis. And so Roosevelt, on his way back from Yalta, where he and Stalin and Churchill divided up the world after the war, he stopped in the Red Sea and met with the King of Saudi Arabia and made a deal with him. He said, we will prop up your kingdom in exchange for oil security. Now, why in the world would the president of the energy dominant country of the world do that? Because we won World War II because of it. How about that for a good reason?
Right.
I want to keep that, whatever that is. So that is the centerpiece, and always has been, of Middle Eastern, certainly U.S. foreign policy. And anyone who
controls the flow of oil, right? And that was Iraq 1, Iraq 2 was fundamentally about that very issue, in my view.
In my view, also, and anyone who thinks differently simply doesn't understand history very well.
And so your point about Iran rising, I mean, partly that's because of the chaos in Iraq, the Saudis being, they're distracted on a whole lot of levels, but Iran is nominally pro-American and would, in theory, could be, look, we both suffer from bad governments, but they're clearly have a growing population, a growing energy demand, and they want to be players. They still, I remember, want to be connected to Europe via gas pipeline. Is keeping their oil off the market the key to keeping Iran a secondary power? Is because that's been part of the policy as well for a long time.
Well, that's been part of the default policy because, and again, politics, party politics is not an issue right now in this conversation. But what George W. Bush did when he invaded Iraq is he completely upset the balance of power in the Middle East. And he created this tremendous opportunity for Iran to expand its sphere of influence into Iraq. Now, Iraq, for those listeners who don't know, I mean, Iraq is the second largest producer of crude oil in OPEC after Saudi Arabia. And as far as reserves, or remaining reserves and et cetera, we can argue about the details, but probably Iraq has a longer future in oil than Saudi Arabia does. And so Iran is also an absolute powerhouse of production. You combine Iran and Iraq, and you've got a focus of oil power that is at least equal to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. And so that's the struggle. And of course, there's the Shia Sunni, the sectarianism that also divides kind of nicely along those lines. And so we screwed it up. Again, no, not pointing any fingers, but we did. We messed up the balance of power. We gave a huge opportunity to Iran. And along comes Barack Obama, and he said, the future of the Middle East is not in our traditional alignments, which is to say Egypt and Israel and Saudi Arabia. The future is in Iran, Iraq, and et cetera. And I'm not going to argue right or wrong, but his position was not without some basis or some logic. And so he pivoted towards Iran, and of course that annoyed, to use a nice word, our traditional allies, and Trump came in and he went the other direction on that, and who knows exactly where we're going today. But poor old Lebanon, I mean, Lebanon gets, it's caught in the middle of this thing. It was basically a puppet of Syria for an awful long time.
Right.
Syria has been distracted in a terrible civil war for a long time, and Hezbollah, again, Iran. I mean, it's basically, if I had to say, Lebanon is more under the influence of Iran than it is anyone else right now.
Yeah, well, that's my read as well. Just driving around Beirut, and I don't have a degree in Middle Eastern history. I'm no expert, but being in Beirut just for a week or so and seeing Hezbollah's power and the fact that entire Hezbollah neighborhoods in Beirut don't pay their electric bills, which was the focus of
tells you something.
Well, right, tells you who runs the place. So just a few more questions, Art, because we've been talking for almost an hour now. Again, my guest is Art Berman. He's the director of Labyrinth Consulting Services. He's at artberman.com. You can get his free newsletter by signing up there. William Stanley Jevons was the first energy economist. Was Jevons, and for those of you listening who don't know, he wrote a book in 1865 called The Coal Question. And the gist of the Jevons paradox was efficiency doesn't save energy, it increases it. Was Jevons right?
I think he was. I'm not an economist, but
this is your field. I mean, you work in the connection between the physical and the economic, right? That's where you make your money.
Yeah, no, I think he was, again, high level. Yeah, he was right. I mean, there's certainly complications to, every axiom, but yeah, it makes sense to me. Always has.
And so we may be using oil more efficiently, but we're finding more ways to use it, and we're using in plastics and everything else. So, but let me move on. So you haven't. I just noticed you haven't been writing for Forbes since January, I think, of this year. Have you publish more on your own website now? I'm just curious about how where you find your own best platform in terms of your work.
Right. Well, so I've gone, at least as an experiment, to more of a subscription basis. So, as you point out, I mean, there are plenty of essays or posts or whatever you want to call them on my website that are free to everybody. But as an experiment, I've gone to devoting most of my energy to a couple of 2 weekly reports, one on oil and one on gas, and a monthly, which is just a newsletter, which is mostly about oil. And that's consumed most of my time. Forbes is wonderful and great, and I probably will go back to publishing with them once I figure out where this experiment is heading. But that's the explanation, Robert.
Gotcha. Well, we haven't talked at all about natural gas, and the prices for nat gas are just now over $5. So just
Right.
quick question. How much is that a reflection of the decline in the production of associated gas in the US? And how much of it is just this incredible demand surge that we're seeing in Europe and the United States, around the world for gas?
Well, in a way, neither.
Ah, okay.
What it's really about, it is about demand. And so what's gone on I mean, everything you said is true, by the way. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with what you said. But what's happened is the United States has gone from being a net gas importer, and in about 2016 we became a net gas exporter. And today our gross exports are something like 17 or 18 BCF a day. We use something like 70, so that's a massive proportion
And
of
so those
our.
exports, and that's we're exporting 17 to 18 BCF a day. How much of that is LNG? About 10? Is that roughly half or more than that?
Right now, I can't. I'd say it's a little bit more than half. So the export. So we have. So if we talk in terms of net,
Right.
the net I'm guessing today is about 9 or 10 BCF a day. So we export gas by pipeline to Canada and to Mexico,
Right.
and we import gas from Canada, but not from Mexico. So Mexico is probably on average maybe 4 BCF a day
Uh-huh.
of net exports, and LNG is the rest. So it's a little bit more than half.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what's happened here is that the net exports of gas have steadily increased from 2016 from 0 to, let's just say, 10 for round numbers, 10 BCF a day. And in 2020, last year, the summer before, yeah, last summer, because of COVID, there was like no demand for LNG. So LNG exports from the United States went way down, and they've gone right back up. Actually, they've increased. And so we got a break last year. We should have had this problem last summer, but because actually last summer was hotter than this summer,
Uh-huh.
at least so far in terms of weather. And weather, as you know, is a
Right.
big factor. It's not the only factor, but it's a big factor.
Sure.
And so what's happened is that we got a break on exports last summer, which has come back in spades. And the other thing that's hurt us, well, it depends on who's hurt. The consumer got hurt. Is the big freeze that we had in February
Right.
just wiped out our surplus like in a matter of 2 weeks. And so we went from a very comfortable surplus to not an uncomfortable deficit, but a deficit nonetheless. And so again, back to where we started this conversation about markets and what they're looking for, which is supply. Markets are right now saying, holy, you know what? We're going into winter, and we got an increasing comparative inventory deficit. I mean, comparative inventory has gone down 30 BCF in the last 2 weeks, and this is not a good. I mean, usually we're adding, we're growing, and we've been declining for most of the summer for all the reasons I just stated. And so the market is saying, guys, we've been raising the price, get busy and drill. Back to your question about associated gas. That was the theory. The theory was that, okay, tight oil production's way down, therefore all that associated gas is going to go way down. And I bought into that completely. But that didn't really happen so much. I mean, oil production went down, gas production went down, but they both came back, or at least leveled out. And so today, natural gas production, dry gas production in the United States is at levels that are higher than just about anything we had before about mid-2019, which was the peak of natural gas production. So in the historical context, it's not like we're producing a pittance. We're only producing less compared to the peak. And so you get right down to it, and the simple answer is that tight oil producers have figured out how to use rigs more efficiently since about 2019 in a very impressive way. That if you look at the number of completions, forget about rig count, that before COVID came along, completions were dropping at a fairly impressive rate, and production was increasing. So we were using rigs better, we were doing completions better, and then after COVID, we don't seem to be doing the completions as well because we don't have any money. But we are doing the rig management better. And so rather than dropping production down to what I thought it would be 8 or 9 million, we're holding steady at 11 or 11 and a little. And that's a big kudo to the oil, to the oil and gas business, figuring out ways of doing things more efficiently.
And it's remarkable, isn't it, as you say that, because it just jogs my memory that's roughly at 11 million a day. We're roughly 100, twice the level of production in the U.S. in 2005, 2006 timeframe. I mean, it's just an enormous. It's just an unprecedented in world history, as far as I know, to see this kind of increase in oil and gas production in one country over such a short time. It's just it's just a remarkable part of how the business works.
And natural gas was the same. I mean,
right.
The surge in production that began in early 2017 and went on. I mean, it was just jaw-dropping, really.
Well, so let me just ask you a few more things, Art, because as I said, I like to keep these around an hour. Are you bullish on America?
I'm bullish on America compared to our peers. I'm not bullish on America. No, I think we are drowning in debt, and there's just no way for me to be bullish on a company or a country that has the level of debt that we do right now. But compared to everybody else, we're kind of all in the same boat.
Still the best house in the bad neighborhood.
Exactly.
Well, you begged me to ask this question then. Well, so you said you wouldn't invest in the company. So where's a guy like you, given your long experience, where do you put your money? What's investable?
I'm a yield seeker, just like everybody else when it comes right down to it. And I wherever I can get it is where I go. And right now, energy just isn't it. I mean, you look at the not just oil and gas, but you just look at all the energy index from the S&P 500 and compare it to the total S&P index or the ESG index. And I mean, the two are going in the opposite direction. And so is that right? I mean, should it be that way? Well, that's a whole nother conversation. And obviously I think no. I mean, I'm the guy that said oil is the economy.
Right. Yeah.
And if energy is 2% of S&P 500 market cap, there's a huge disconnect going on there. And that's part of the reason that I hesitated strongly when you asked that very good question, am I bullish on America? That if America is as energy blind as I see it to be, then for as much as I love the place and wouldn't live anywhere else and will defend it to the death, no, I can't honestly be bullish about it, Robert. We can't be blind to what is so fundamental. You didn't ask me to follow up on that comment I made that no species has ever gone from a higher to a lower energy density source. I mean, go try to convince a lion
to become a vegan.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been out on the savannah, and lions sit around and do nothing for a lot. They sleep a lot,
right?
Because they got the dents back. They kill the impala. They kill the whatever's out there. And if they had to spend 23 hours a day eating leaves like an elephant, forget it. It's not going to happen, right?
So,
and the same is true with us. We are hell-bent, for better or worse, on going to a much lower energy density or power density source of our economy. And how in the world can you be bullish on that economy knowing that it is directly proportional to the energy productivity of its source? And whether we need to do that for the climate is another conversation altogether. But I'm convinced that the people that are the most enthusiastic about degrowth and about Extinction Rebellion and all this kind of stuff, that if they understood that what they want will lead to negative economic growth for them, forget about GDP, I don't think they would. They don't know what they're signing up for. They believe the propaganda of decoupling, back to Schmiel's comment. They think that, somehow we're going to make this change and everything's going to be just like it is right now, and it won't. It can't be. It's just the physics of it. It's not my opinion, and that's something that people, if this is something we want to do because we feel it's necessary for the climate and the environment, then that's great. Let's understand let's understand what's on the table
and say it out loud.
And be honest about it. And economic growth is not part of that equation as far as I can gather. And I want to believe, I'm like Fox Mulder on the X-Files. I want to believe, but I don't, I don't see that it's there. It's not there now. That's for sure.
What are you reading? I know we've mentioned Václav Smil. What are you reading on your nightstand or on your desk? What books are you at hand?
I'm reading Moby Dick. I read it in 8th
Classic.
grade.
Yeah.
And it's one of those books that it must have been a different person who read it, because I remember the story and absolutely nothing else. I'm reading the Snow Leopard by Peter Matheson, which is about a trek through the Himalayas by a botanist and his friend. And
Peter Matheson and George Schaller.
Exactly. And I think I read that when I was probably 35, and same comment. I liked it then. I liked Moby Dick when I was in 8th grade too. I thought it was great, but it was a different person,
So I met Peter Matheson. This is apropos of nothing, and
wow.
Anyway, a long time ago, I met him at the King Ranch on a bird watching expedition, and he was there. And so, before I left, a friend of mine told me, well, I have a joke for you to tell Peter Matheson. And I said, okay, well, what is it? So anyway, I meet Peter Matheson. I'm with my wife. I said, well, I have this riddle I need to lay on you. He says, well, okay, go ahead. I said, so what did the Zen Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. So anyway, yeah, it's a book about Zen and finding the snow leopard when he quit looking for the snow leopard. So anyway, all right, that's a big aside, which I don't think I've ever told that riddle on the podcast, but now I
love
have.
it. So. That's great.
Okay, last question, Art Berman. What gives you hope?
Gives me hope is that despite the sort of the arcane and very technical aspect of what I talk about, that there are a lot of people that want to know. I mean, I'm never going to be a public figure. I'm never going to be famous for what I do, and don't care if I am. But the fact that I have tens of thousands of followers on Twitter, and that there are people that say, we want to understand, what you're talking about, that gives me hope. That there are young people who, they're desperately concerned about climate change, and they get this idea that, well, but you're telling us that there's, that I don't know what I'm signing up for. Tell me what I'm signing up for. That's very encouraging to me, that there are people who subscribe to the, I don't think it's uniquely American, but I look back at guys like Abraham Lincoln, and I mean, that guy stayed up until the candle went out, reading whatever the hell he could find, even if it was just the Bible, because that's what you did. That's what guys like that did. You learned as much as you could. And the fact that, that maybe there's 95% of people that, are in their Xbox or their iPhone, and there's a few percent that say, hey, we want to know more about what you know. That encourages me and gives me hope, because they're the ones that are going to inherit whatever it is we're giving them. So good for them that there's some that, and not that they should necessarily come to me. I mean, I don't have all the answers. I'm not even sure I'm right about some of the answers, but I assume if they're coming to me, they're coming to you. They're coming to Václav Smil. They're coming to other people that collectively can give them some kind of a balanced view of what the world really runs on, and it runs on energy.
Well, let's stop there. Art Berman, thanks a million for coming on the Power Hungry podcast. And thanks to all of you in podcast land. You can find Art at artberman.com. And this has been great, Art. Been great to catch up with you. Thanks to all of you in podcast land. Tune in for the next episode of the Power Hungry podcast. Until then, see ya.